It feels like it's going to get better before it gets worse, doesn't it? I mean, I'm going to edit point. Welcome to Cloud Realities, a conversation show exploring the practical and exciting alternate realities that can be unleashed through cloud-driven transformation. I'm Dave Chapman.
I'm Sjoukje.
And I'm Rob Kernahan.
And this week we're going to return to one of the big subjects of our time, which is sustainability, tech's role in sustainability, and the bigger picture around how data is used and how you get to the truth. And how the truth actually might be a little scarier than it should be before you get going on the right journey. But before that, went into the office the other day and I couldn't see Rob because his desk was covered in plants, like potted plants, cactuses, and he was sort of hidden behind a wall of it. And I went up to him and I'm like, Rob, you all right? And he's like, yes, David, I'm just working on just getting some accurate metrics around my carbon footprint and just trying to bring that down. And I'm like, good for you, Rob. What else is confusing you this week?
I didn't know where that one was going to go, Dave, actually. I quite like that, the cactus angle.
Yeah, start somewhere, Rob.
You got to start somewhere. Small things build into
exactly
giant mountains.
Exactly.
This week, I've mainly been confused by digital litter.
Oh, also right in that sort of space.
No, but there's three angles to digital litter. I don't think we've got a handle on it first. So in the olden days, you'd get a lot of people together and you'd all look very stern and you'd take a photo and that was a very accurate representation and we would cherish said photo and we would stick it in an album. And now, smartphones in your pocket, everybody's taking photos everywhere. They're not controlling them. They might upload to some random cloud that they probably don't pay attention to. And what happens to it? So do our memories get deleted? Yeah. Are we about to lose a great body of wealth of understanding and history? The second angle is that we're just filming stuff that we shouldn't. So the fireworks display angle. How many people have taken a video of a fireworks display and then honestly tell me, did you ever watch that video again of people going, ooh, ah, hey, right? And then the third angle is there's all this, and that's obviously got a CO2 impact sustainability because that's 100 meg video that's never going to get used by anybody in the future, yet it's sat on some server somewhere spinning a disk wheel or whatever. And then the final part is everything's getting post-processed by AI. And I know it's just the tweaks around the edges, but as that becomes more prolific on your smartphone, is that going to actually start to influence our memories where it might, change the picture so much that key artifacts are removed? And I don't think as a consumer or a person, we've got a good grip of managing digital litter from a sustainability point of view, from a stop recording stuff you're never going to watch and kill the planet, and the sort of just let AI run away with it. And so I'm wondering where we're going to go.
I mean, it's connected to so many bad behaviors on those devices, isn't it? So for every great new phone you get and for every well-intended video of a fireworks display, there is then a trail of consequences behind that I don't think we've come to terms with. And those consequences not only are in the way that you pointed out, which is like the carbon footprint of a bazillion firework displays, or the bigger concern around human history being deleted because actually we haven't created emotional connections to, like the 20 photographs of my childhood. Like my childhood is almost completely undocumented photographically.
There's the violin going off in the background again, Dave, for you. Yeah.
But yeah, my children's childhoods are almost minutely documented. Yet I don't know what to do with it. There's so much of it. I don't know how to access it. Yeah.
And what's the key event photo buried in the other 100 you took?
Right.
Yeah. At least with your 20 that's documented you as a kid, it's easy to understand that as a thing to control and manage in an album somewhere.
Now, you could say that AI has got a role to play in some of what you're talking about in terms of making that accessible, popping up, my phone pops up a nice picture every time I kind of take it off standby. And I'm like, oh, I remember that photo. And that's quite a nice thing. But I think it's the consequences, isn't it? That the consequences of the clutter and probably its carbon effect. If it didn't have the carbon effect, I would probably be arguing that it is what it is and we'll work our way through that. But I think the carbon effect of it, I think, is is undeniable at this stage.
And then the sort of digital rights after we shuffle off this mortal coil, who gets their hands on it to make sure it's secured and your family have the memories of what was and what's gone. And I don't think we control that either now. And there's been a lot of conversation in society about signing over your digital accounts
right.
as part of the, that sort of will process. But again, we haven't got to grips with society. And you hear lots of people trying to get into loved ones' digital accounts when they've passed away, but they can't. And the tech company saying no, and there's this privacy part about it, which is also extremely important. So it doesn't feel like we've got our a good grip of what's going on.
No, it feels like you do in many other things in your life, like your savings accounts and things like that you have to sign like a trustee thing where your descendants can take control of your assets when they need to. Digital assets, I think, should form the same thing. Maybe when you're signing up to, whatever cloud it is or whatever Facebook it is, that you should put a second on there that's your, partner or whoever that might be.
We'll see what happens.
We will see what happens. And actually, to sort of dig into some of the themes of that, I'm delighted to say we have Mark Butcher joining us on today's show. He's the founder of Posetiv and works very heavily in the GreenOps space. Mark, thank you for joining us today. Do you want to introduce yourself and say a word about Posetiv?
Thank you for having me. So I'm looking forward to it. And so, as you said, I'm the founder of Posetiv, and we focus in a number of areas, but actually one of them has become all dominating in the last couple of years. So it's GreenOps, FinOps, and DevOps. But with the rise of kind of IT's awareness of its footprint, suddenly GreenOps has become the all-encompassing part of our life. And we're spending most of our time now on delivering advisory services, helping people kind of wrestle with that really difficult task of understanding what sustainability means to their digital services, and more importantly, what they can actually do about it with a bit of honesty and transparency.
So, Mark, let's get cracking with where we are in terms of looking at emissions. So it seems to me that there's going to be a long lag time in terms of emissions actually coming down. So even if we take like a lot of action now, that you're not going to see that directly coming up in emissions data, are you? How long do you think that lag time is, and what does that look like for you?
That's kind of a really interesting question, because one of the things we seem to be stubbornly refusing to admit to ourselves is net zero kind of in IT may not be possible. And what I mean by that is every organization is trying to digitize more, they're trying to transform more, they're trying to invest more money in things like AI, machine learning, new shiny things. And what that means is that when you're investing more, you're buying more, you're building more, and you're delivering more, the baseline that you kind of did is only going to go up one way. So my personal view is we shouldn't really necessarily be looking at hard reductions targets. We should be looking at efficiency targets, which is how do we do the right thing with everything that we're building and delivering? How do we make the right decisions and make everything as carbon efficient or as water efficient as we possibly can? Because I think every large enterprise, as it's now going to start actually reporting more emissions type data, is going to be finding the challenge that the numbers they're going to be reporting on a per unit and a total basis are going to go up.
Is that just because there's more awareness? So you've got to get the whole problem out before you can start to deal with the problem, sort of thing?
It definitely is a more awareness, and that is more awareness at all levels as well. So it's more awareness at the consumer level, so the large enterprise buying lots of things. There's also more awareness at the vendor level and the provider level, because the problem we've got is when I talk about the unit of consumption, is most of the carbon metrics people have had for the last few years, they've kind of been a little bit of nonsense. We're not really calculating things accurately. We're not really including everything. And the more we understand, the more we include. And the more we include, the more the units we report go up. So the problem that means is that no matter how kind of your vendor, so pick any server vendor, any storage vendor, any cloud vendor, they're all buying things and building things. And they're now including more of their emissions in their calculations because they understand what they have to include. So that means that like last year, they might have thought a unit was like 500 kilograms, but now it's 1,000 kilograms.
Right.
So they're now reporting that and rolling it upwards. And they're calculating things like the emissions from power consumption more accurately rather than just making them up as they go along. So with more accurate data comes the pain of bigger numbers.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge I think CTOs and CIOs are going to have, is the inconvenient truth. That's really what it is reporting bigger, badder numbers. And how do you post that bad news?
At the beginning of that, you talked about the fact that you also doubt that sort of tech or IT can ever get to, I think you said net zero or carbon free. I think I want to unpack that a little bit. So first of all, maybe give us your definitions of carbon free and net zero. And then let's talk about the IT supply chain and why you think it's going to be very difficult to get to, kind of very low or zero measures.
Net zero for most people is simply they've eliminated as much of their carbon as they possibly can from the production and delivery, so the use phase and embodied phase of their products and services. And normally that gets down to the 10% residual is normally that boundary that people tend to get to. And then you fall into kind of the carbon neutral thing, because people always conflate kind of carbon neutrality and net zero, and they are two entirely different things. And that's the problem when you start conflating, and people, because the general average person assumes that kind of net zero means I'm using renewable energy. And it doesn't at all. That kind of falls under the boundary, kind of the carbon neutrality bit. And even if you're buying renewable energy, that doesn't mean you're using renewable energy. What you actually use is a blend of whatever falls out the plug in the location in which you're operating your services from. And so it's great you're buying it, but it doesn't mean you're using it. You have to take account of the actual blend of the carbon intensity of the location in which you're operating from. And that's why we're now seeing all this legislation coming in and governance coming in, which has started to try and force people to be that little bit more transparent and clear. So that, because we have been doing so much game playing, and that actually comes back into my major malfunction, of which I have many, with things like there's no need to laugh. That's just mean.
We're all the same.
That was mean, Dave. Actually, the way you chuckled there, he was, that was the time for a supportive, helpful, uplifting comment about how Mark's helping the world be better.
No, it was more of it resonates with me because I feel like that most days. Chuckle.
And it's when we get into that whole kind of net zero thing, is what people end up doing is, because they have this obsessive target that they can't reduce to, they end up gaming it. And gaming it means you end up hiding things, and you put more effort into pretending you're doing something than you are into actually doing the thing. Because leaders want the good news. And so one of the biggest pieces of advice that I give to large enterprise users all the time is, please go to your leaders now and explain that IT emissions are going to be going up. So give them the bad news now, because you've got then the next year or so for them to stop screaming and crying.
So when you track back down a value chain of IT, what is it about it that you think is going to be so difficult to get to either net zero or neutral? Because, of course, there's a lot of rhetoric in the industry about all of the providers getting their emissions down, getting their footprints down. So why is it not just a matter of time for the elements of the supply chain to connect together in a way that it then provides either a net zero or a close to neutral position?
It mostly comes from corporate transparency, politics, and the economic driver to make profit.
Like most things.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because if you look at it, the truthfulness is that we all talk about the circular economy. Every large vendor and large manufacturer posts utter nonsense about what they're doing to adopt the circular economy and how they're driving it and what they're doing to improve it. And the truth is, when you get down to it, we're still ripping the raw materials out the ground in really unsustainable ways.
And it's that we are wrapped around the axle of capitalism that requires ever-increasing productivity and production to sustain the system based against debt. And you go, nobody's come up with a better system. Nobody's actually in control. And we have to live with the reality that the system we live in, that has worked for us until we realized it was wrecking the planet.
Yep.
How do we transition to the alternative and do it without killing the financial system and causing countries to go off track and stuff? And I think there's that realization that the system we live in is built on consumption, and we are now struggling that consumption is killing the environment. And I think there's just a big problem. How do we deal with that one?
Well, the hardest thing is what this needs is people to come together and actually accept the change they're going to have to put in. And there are things they could do much faster. So if I go back to that circular economy thing, it's the really harsh truth is it's a lot of it is nonsense, because they say, well, recycling, reuse, repurpose, we're extracting the raw materials again. But then you look at how they're extracting them. So you look at things, so take your average, so the adoption of the circular economy in large enterprises has actually dropped in the last couple of years, and it hasn't increased despite what they say at all. And that's disheartening. But even when you then look at how the materials are being reclaimed, so reuse and repurposing, great, that happens. Not happening enough. But then when you get to the end of it, where things don't have a purposeful use and they need to get the raw materials back, do you know what we're doing? We're putting them on boats, we're shipping them to places like Antwerp, and we're burning them in blast furnaces at 4,000 degrees to smelt it to get the raw materials back out with huge amounts of chemicals. They're then leaching into the water table, poisoning the kids in the local area. How does that sound like a sustainable thing to be doing? But there are technologies that have now come through with companies doing really, really innovative things, and companies in the UK doing brilliant things actually, where they're using technologies called things like bio-leaching. where they're using non-hazardous chemicals at low temperature to extract as much of the raw materials. It's a concept called urban mining. That's actually true circular economy, because then what they do is they take those raw materials that they extract back and they pump them back into the supply chain to create that closed loop supply chain.
It is that realization that the global will, or the ability of the global system to come together to fix the problems that we discussed, is too slow and unlikely to achieve its outcome. There is that angle that says there's going to be a big role to play in technology and changes like you've just discussed that are going to fix it. So, the faith has to be, you can't believe the global system will work because it's too slow. Therefore, we have to try and do the things that you talk about, which is the innovation in the process to correct it and make it work effectively.
Yeah, so where this really comes down to is it's a bit of a cheesy phrase, but it's that butterfly effect. Because the one challenge I have is that when I go and talk to a lot of people, everyone always says the same thing. But what I do, I'm just one person, I'm just one company, I'm just one group of companies. My actions are irrelevant. And they'll say something like, well, the UK, we're only X% of global emissions. China's the bad guy. They need to do everything. Yeah, but if everyone says the same thing, then nothing happens.
Exactly.
Yeah. Actions at every level, actions have consequences. And within the boundaries of IT.
Yes, I was actually going to bring us back to the boundaries of IT for a second and talk about how we can proactively, from an IT practitioner point of view, how do we get after this problem? I see a lot of crossover chat between FinOps and GreenOps and whether cost is a proxy for sustainability. So just as an intro to then the practical measures we can take around this today, what's your thoughts on cost as a proxy?
My first thought is you're deliberately trying to trigger me today. So cost as
he's good at it, isn't he? He does it to me every day.
You mean Rob's rant against capitalism isn't the trigger?
Yeah.
It was a very difficult question to ask to Mark, Rob.
That was the macro question of the week award to Rob.
So that's one that recently really actually did set me off when the Amazon CTO the AWS CTO stood on the stage and stood up and said, "We think cost is a proxy for sustainability." And it's like, it's not. In no way is it at all in the slightest. How can you use, so if I take, for example, I'm buying two different server types. Yeah. One, so both cost me $1 per unit. Yeah. One of them, gigantically sustainable server build, running at really hideously low, low power, really efficient in a low carbon zone. Yeah. That could have a total emissions in reality of like 1 gram. You compare it with the same dollar server in a really high carbon intensity zone, built in a really inefficient way, which could have an emissions factor of 10,000 kilograms. Yeah. How is that same dollar converted back into the same metric of sustainability? Cost as a proxy is just an excuse for not having data. It's not having meaningful data. You can't align the two in a meaningful manner. But conversely, saying that, GreenOps and FinOps do align where if you spend less, you generally reduce your emissions, but it's not a proxy for a calculation. You can't align those two things because the biggest challenge people have in FinOps is they want meaningful data. They want data they will trust, and they will not make decisions with garbage data. And when you can't align it, so for example, going back to my example of so if you want to optimize your services from the context of carbon as well as the concept of cost, you can't use that cost as a proxy to make a different decision because all you're doing is looking at, well, is that the right decision? If I change from X build model to Y build model, if I go serverless to monolithic, or monolithic to serverless, I switch from R5 XLs to C5, what will that impact that have? Yeah. Well, your costs gone down by 50%. Well, have my emissions gone down? Probably not.
So what in your mind then, how would you contrast FinOps and GreenOps? Is it effectively the same team broadly doing the same thing and just reporting in two different channels? Or is there something sort of fundamentally different between the two? And actually what might happen over time is those two things might get pulled apart as functions because actually their purpose is different, even though some of the underlying mechanism might be the same.
They overlap really nicely, and they actually are a really well-aligned kind of group to work as one. It's just a different KPI and a different metric. So the interesting thing that we've done recently, so it's just been published. We did a survey with Climate Action Tech that we got 2,680 responses, and we asked the honest question, because I've been suspicious about this for some time, most of my career, which is we all talk about cost efficiencies and budget cuts and optimizing spend, and everyone always assumes that we care about money. I think it's time to be honest and go that as individuals and organizations, we don't care about money. When our bosses scream at us we need to save budget, we need to save money, and everyone nods and smiles and then goes out of the room and carries on doing exactly what they're doing, and doesn't change a thing. Because if we truly cared about money, we wouldn't have the industry of FinOps in the first place. We wouldn't have cost optimization as being a driver because we'd already be doing it by the nature that we cared about the amount of money we were spending. And so we did the survey to find out actually the truth of it is, do people care more about cost as a KPI or carbon as a KPI? And we found really interestingly that of the 2,680 responses, less than 16% said cost. 50% said carbon. So what that shows is there's a real motivator to use a different form of KPI. So if you can show, because in FinOps, you give people the KPIs and the targets, say, we need to optimize X by Y to do this, effective savings rates, optimization rates, all that kind of stuff. And what we found was if you switch it to give someone carbon as the metric unit in a manner they understand, they suddenly actually get personally involved in wanting to drive the change because they care about the thing.
What were the demographics in that, Mark? Did you see any shifts in that as you went from, say, Gen X through to Millennial through to Gen Z?
So the one thing we didn't have was the age, but we do know from working with people, that's a really interesting thing as well, as we're seeing, ironically, the upper end of the spectrum really interested in this, and definitely the Gen Zs absolutely massively interested in this. And it's that bit in the middle where there's still a lot of skepticism about it. But what we did see was more geographic differences. And we saw role-based differences as well. So the geographic one was exactly kind of as you'd expect. Europe as a focus was significantly further ahead in terms of actually caring about it and already doing something about it. Because again, the interesting thing we found was that 60% of people who responded said their organizations already are or are intending to map their digital carbon footprint from cloud services. But then when you got to the US, that dropped from 60% down to, I think the figure was 29.8%, I think, something like that, in that ballpark.
And when you look at like the legislation coming in on reporting on your full supply chain and stuff, I think that's becoming an EU regulation shortly. What do you think the factor is about the social morality of it and like the Gen Z really caring about it in their future and legislation driving the requirement for companies to report on it, understand it and improve their process? Do you think that's equal balance working well, or do you think there's an imbalance and one is leading the other? What's your view there?
I think they're operating very, very independently of each other right now, but they're a necessary evil. So the truth is, in most corporations won't do anything unless they really have to, unless they happen to have a leader who implicitly actually cares rather than pretending they care. But even then, it's a struggle. But if they have to do it for the reason of legislation, then suddenly that becomes like a motivating driver. And also businesses are getting a lot of pressure from shareholders, from investors. And the other big thing that we found, this is really interesting, is a lot of big old enterprise organizations are struggling to recruit the next generation of tech talent. So they're starting to find they're fishing from very small pools. So they can't get the people they want to do AI, ML, insert whatever new techie shiny thing they want to do. And they're finding actually those people are going to the organizations whose their morals and ethics are aligned with them. So what they're finding is if they actually focus on sustainability and use that as a differentiator, they're now able to recruit those people back in. So from a diversity perspective, it's actually helping them drive what they develop and how they develop in a much more meaningful manner because they can get the people they want now.
Very good. So if we then focus on what then you would advise organizations that have got significant cloud footprints, or even actually if they're only just starting their journey, or maybe more tricky this, but even not in the cloud, what's the reasonable response here, do you think? What does good practice look like today in the world of GreenOps, and how does that differentiate from what's going on in the world of FinOps? And we've talked about FinOps a fair bit on the show this season, and even when you've got cost as a driver, which is more, as you say, it's kind of the more usual situation in enterprises today. Frankly, not that many of us are yet doing even FinOps that well. So what does GreenOps good practice look like, and how do we get into it in a more material way?
That's a big question.
Is it as big as Rob's "the capitalist system is ruining the world" question?
It is. We just have to wake up and understand.
One rung down for it. So where this comes from is GreenOps is a rapidly developing practice, and the biggest challenge people are having is we're all operating in silos. So if you look at the breadth of IT, the one thing that I always encourage is stop thinking about this as your cloud services and your cloud team doing it and your data center team doing it and your infrastructure team doing it. Yeah. What you need to look is holistically at your entire IT ecosystem and work out where the problems are you're trying to solve. Because until you create that whole of IT baseline, you don't know whether you're just fiddling with the wrong area. You need to work out basically, see what levers can you pull to make a different decision. And the other bit is really, really critical, is stop pretending you're always going to try and be sustainable, because you won't. It's about how do you move sustainability to become a non-functional requirement. So how do you get it to sit alongside your other pressures? Because you've got things like risk, governance, security, which will take priority a lot of the time. And it's about understanding that your actions have consequences. And so so when you look back, so just say you have to make security-led decisions that massively increase your emissions. And at the end of the year, you report them and someone starts shouting about where this has gone wrong, why did we do it, who did it, why? You can just go, well, because of X, Y happened. And then the business can decide whether they're willing to adjust and change, which is what comes back to my point about it being an organizational, it's a transformation of an operating model more than just being a technology component part. And then what you need to be doing at a GreenOps layer is calculating everything in a consistent methodology so you know you can compare apples with apples. Because most people that come up and they go, well, how do we know whether it's better and more sustainable to put it in our data center versus putting it in the cloud? How do we know whether it's better to be in the cloud in Dublin versus the cloud in Amsterdam? How do we know? And the answer is that's very hard right now. So you need the granular data, and you need to understand that data is not perfect as well.
If I'm asking a supplier to provide me with a solution, and I'm asking that supplier to provide me with views on its green credentials or its sustainability, what does good look like for you? Because often you see quite a bit of this stuff tucked away in the corporate social responsibility section, where you make some relatively low impact commitments on things. But what does a really good, sustainable, embedded from the start solution look like to you?
So you need to break it into two areas. And this is one of the problems, is that procurement are the front end of getting sort of sustainability data for organizations, because they are the people who are out there negotiating the contracts, because there's no better time to get metrics than when you're negotiating something with someone, because that's when they're most willing and most weak to give you what you need in the right level of detail. The problem right now is most organizations are asking for what I would call corporate level sustainability data. And that's the fluff and nonsense that you were just talking about. So it's the shiny brochure that makes loads of vague promises about things they're not really actually doing, with numbers that actually aren't inclusive and and are very, very vague, but sound good. So procurement teams get it and they go, I can weigh that. That's 3.5 stone for that one versus 2.5 stone for that one. Therefore, they're more sustainable. And besides, they had pictures of happy, smiling children in theirs, and it made me feel good. That's very different to having accurate product level metrics. So what you need to do is actually do a bit of both, which is to validate your supplier. How are they doing, and what are they doing, and are they morally and ethically aligned with you? So are they doing the right things? Right. Including the breadth of ESG, not just sustainability. And then it's about the product level metrics, and that's where it's very detail focused. So what you need is that consistent approach to be asking for the vendors. Do you have a life cycle assessment for your individual product? Do you have an environmental product declaration? Do you have a breakdown of your emissions factors? Can you provide them to me in a consistent and standardized manner? Because IT buys a lot of stuff, and it's about how you get that data from someone in a consistent and standard way so that you know whether it's kind of good or bad. And it isn't about always castigating and beating up the vendor for being bad for not giving you the data. It's actually about knowing in your supply chain how you rate those vendors and which ones you need to work with to use your weight as the consumer to drive change. Because that bit we talked about at the beginning, which is no one's going to change unless everyone pushes in the same direction. So it's big consumers need to push on the vendors. The big vendors need to push on their supply chain to get better data, because everyone's asking the same thing and going, we just need better data that we trust. Right. Because because we go to a vendor, the vendors are the same. They're no different to the big bank buying the stuff. The vendor's just buying different things. They're buying the materials, the construction, the chipboard. So they're going to their supply chain and saying, can I have sustainability metrics? Can I have EPDs? Can I have LCAs? We're all fighting that same thing. Let's maybe bring our conversation today to a bit of a close by going full circle and talking about the thing that we talked about at the beginning, which was emissions are likely to go up. It's likely to get worse before it gets better. So what does good reporting look like to you? So if you're advising a chief executive of an organization on what they should do to push for accurate reporting in their business ecosystem, is that a separate dashboard that looks like, hey, here's my green dashboard, or is it embedded, or is it a mix of the two? What are your thoughts on best practice there? You've done it again. You triggered me again by mentioning dashboards. So
that's 3 for 3 now, Dave. Well done.
there's a real tendency. So in IT, we love tools and we love dashboards. And I'm fairly well known now for my statement is, please stop buying tools you're not going to use. You don't need another dashboard tool at all. No one needs another dashboard tool, because all that happens is there's loads of vendors shilling like sustainability dashboards for consolidating it, and they look beautiful. I mean, I love looking at them, and you have to go, look at these data points you can get, and the analysis you can get, and the decisions I can make. World's going to be wonderful. And you get them, and first question I always ask is, okay, what do I do? And they go, oh, well, you just need to connect your data. Yeah, oh God. Right, okay. So you're saying all you've done is you've got a visualization layer where I need to supply all the data again. Oh no, well, you can use our proxies. Okay, what are your proxies? Well, we use a spend-based. Oh, right, okay. So it's nonsense information then. It's a very intelligent allocation model. I'm not criticizing their ability to analyze data. There's no point in having that layer if you don't have the underpinning bit. Mm-hmm. So actually, the bit that we always talk about is going to the large corporations. That what you need is granular metrics. You need a data lake, effectively, sustainability data. Granular metrics, location-based data based upon your actual usage and your actual consumption. And the next big thing that is the bit that everyone misses every single time is be clear about what are you going to do with this information. So how are you going to use this information to drive a different decision? And you have to split this into two things. There's the information for ESG reporting. So in other words, the metrics you're going to push uphill. So our emissions are yay big, broken into the categories that your ESG team want you to report. Brilliant. You've got that off your back and that's sorted and everyone's happy. Then the other thing is, how do you turn that into useful information that you can use within the boundaries of IT? And that requires a totally different system of thinking. So that is actually then, how do you get that data, not into a dashboard that no one's going to look at? Yeah, because people will look at it for, say, 3 months and then get bored and go away like they always do.
Rob will look at it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I'd bring it out at dinner parties and go, hey, have you seen the latest analysis I've done? Yeah, no.
Look at my bar chart.
Ooh,
yeah. Those kind of dinner parties. Yeah. So it's actually, how do you get it? How do you get this data in your existing systems of record? So because all enterprises are blessed with bundles of tools they use for every area. You got, insert the acronyms. You've got your FinOps tool, your TBM tool, your CMDB, your DSIM. How do you get all this data into the systems where your users already live? And how do you get that data into a format which they understand and can use? So they get a metric that isn't just like this artificial concept for them of scope 1, 2, and 3, where they go, is that good? Because they always ask the same thing. This number, is it a good number or a bad number? Okay, well, it's a number. So then it's actually, how do you allocate it? Because no one cares that the emissions of a server or a storage array or a cloud unit at all. The business doesn't care about that. They don't even care about the VM at all. But a VM is built of consumption units from servers, network switch, load balancers, firewalls, storage, data center, you name it, loads of stuff. It's how you roll it up. So the bit the businesses I'd like to do is get that data lake and create your allocation model. So understand actually, how do you get to a point of going, which application is using which service and what are the emissions of it? How do you get business intelligence? Because actually, the beauty with sustainability data is how do you roll it uphill to make a different decision so that you can give it to your development team, and that development team can go, oh, okay, so if we shifted from this language to this language, X would that would drive that down. If we switch from London to Dublin to Amsterdam, what will happen? Okay, oh God, okay, we do that. What happens if we switch off our development environments that we're not using overnight? Oh, we get a 70% reduction in emissions, do we? Oh, brilliant. What does that mean? Well, that's 10,000 trees saved. Then people are suddenly tied to this. But the key point is getting that into their system of records so it's in their face. Don't expect them to go and log into a thing they don't care about and try and search through and go, right, oh, okay, what do I see? I'm seeing a chart, it's big. Oh, doesn't mean anything to me. My bit's only small. What does it matter if I change a thing? Going back to my original point, the cultural change. And you only drive cultural change by giving people data in the system they want to use.
What have you been looking at this week, Sjoukje?
So each week I do some research on related ideas in transformation and tech, and this week I thought we should take a look at the new era of FinOps and GreenOps, from cloud cost to sustainability to business value. So the focus on GreenOps is expanding, building on the foundation of FinOps. Cloud investments remain crucial with a shift towards a holistic cloud ops strategy involving migration, operations, optimization, and which also includes FinOps and GreenOps for sustainability. So the goals companies should have are to build on intelligence and AI for quicker insights, have efficiency improvements, cost reductions, and look at carbon footprint minimization. So a question, are these the correct goals to become more sustainable and increase business value, or are there important goals missing here?
I think from the conversation we've just had, the cultural point is really key. So we can measure, things we can understand and track and capture. But to get an improvement, what do we measure about behavior and change in the organization and the culture? And that's a much harder thing to understand what you have to do. And I don't know, Mark, from your perspective, if you go in and you have any view on how you shift the dial in that area, but it's something that many struggle with to understand, that there's this big pivot you need to do to say, you've got all this data, how are you actually going to use it effectively? And I think that was one of your core points.
Just to build on that a sec, Rob, before you come in, Mark, it seems to me that a lot of the things that we generally talk about have got some aspect of cultural change attached to them. Even if you're, in inverted commas, doing the digital transformation or cloud transformation element of this, it comes with a very hefty aspect of cultural change to really realize the upward benefits of that. So the more we talk about this stuff, and this one being more critical, probably arguably than the others, particularly from a, kind of a lives of our children point of view, it comes back to cultural change. It constantly comes back to the humans in the middle of it doing the right thing. Yet, change programs and programs that are supposed to be addressing this stuff constantly under-address it, or they see it as something, well, we'll drop an email to everybody about the change and then that'll broadly do it, won't it? So just cultural change generally, it seems to me, feels like a more important element, more important than ever, I think is probably true.
Yep. And so the biggest thing is culture change has to start at the top. And so everyone has to be accountable, not just the teams below. And there's a tendency for leaders to want everyone else to take the pain and not them. So everyone needs the targets, everyone needs the KPIs, and everyone needs ones that are contextual.
That's been Rob's approach, Mark. That's been Rob's approach for 20 years now.
Dodge
the pain downhill.
Yeah. Somebody else can deal with that pain point.
Yeah. Let me know when you've changed.
Yeah, we're all going to be different now. Go and change. Yeah.
Do that thing faster. I don't know what it is. Just do it faster, but cheaper.
Faster and better.
Yeah. And so what it comes down to is that everyone needs align targets, but they need to have a target that's contextual to their role. And this is my point about building it into the culture. Nothing changes unless you actually build it into your operating model and everyone understands how it's aligned and the target, and they have a KPI. And most importantly, you actually give them the time and the budget to make the change. And it's about understanding as well that actions have consequences. So it's not just always trying to make the sustainable decision, but going, right, okay, this time we can't. And everyone understanding that who made that decision, who is accountable. So if you take a really simplistic example of saying, I'm going to deploy an AWS Virginia versus AWS Sweden. And you go to the boss and go, right, we can do this because applications no low latency, we're just going to do it. You go, brilliant. Okay, go ahead. Brilliant. The emissions in Sweden are 80% lower. Good. I mean, the cost is 50% higher. I think, the what?
Say that again. I thought you said 50%.
Yes. Yeah. Because, yeah. How about no? And then, but then that's about that person is now accountable for that decision. So when you get to the end of the year, why has X happened? You can say, well, because we need to allocate more budget, or we need to transform how we built the service, or we need to make a different decision. You can't have both, and it's about being honest and transparent. But so blame doesn't have to stop right at the bottom. The blame has to stop at the person who made that actual decision is accountable. And to do that, they need the data so that you can understand why and what happened.
Well, the other aspect that resonated with me in our conversation, and actually is pertinent to what Sjoukje said there, is the vanity metric aspect of this. And the ease at which organizations are just actually trying to get metrics for metrics' sake, rather than delving into sort of the depths of the change that's really required. And you can, again, this isn't unique to this area, is it? This area just has more of a sharp edge than most.
Yeah, it's the inconvenient truth, which comes back to that, and that comes back to my point about you have to be willing to go back to the business and go, the number's going to go up because of this. And if your business goes, well, that's not good enough. Okay. Well, in that case, then that AI platform you wanted. Well, should we take that one off the list?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Oh, and that data center, should we take that off? Should we stop doing that? Well, no, you can't do that. Okay. Well, you can't do more and reduce it simultaneously. You have to understand. And also the other issue, the gigantic elephant in the room that we are not talking about in IT is no one is measuring software related emissions. So the software that you buy, so your Microsoft licensing, your application licensing, anything like that, we're all obsessed with the hardware. We're not actually looking because if you look at the average IT spend and budget, about 40% is software. But we're not counting that. We're not including that. We're not thinking about that. And the software license, the software companies they're lurking in the background, being mysteriously very, very quiet about the subject. And I know because I do audits of lots of vendors, we have the same conversation with the software vendors all the time. We go, "Can you share with us your emissions metrics?" They go,
interesting.
"Oh, what?
You what now? Hey, what's over there? It's a squirrel. Look at that."
Yeah. Just buy more licenses. Shut up. Renew.
Yeah, I mean, I think there really should be competitive advantage, I think, in stating that stuff in this day and age. I actually wasn't aware of that fact. I thought everybody at this point were at least on it from a bandwagon point of view, if not on it from a good for the earth point of view.
No, because a lot of them are just making it up as they go along, particularly the numbers as well. And and again, one vendor, I will not name them because they would definitely sue me. Is last week in
Probably
an audit.
Best not to then.
Exactly. Yeah, they claimed in the meeting that no customer globally anywhere is asking them for this data. And the problem with that statement was I'd been in 6 different audits with that same vendor asking them for this data.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But there maybe is an underlying point, which is organizations, maybe until they have an audit from somebody like your good self, they're not thinking to ask those questions because it's a new muscle that most organizations are building, I think.
Yeah, and it does come back to that same point that I made about investing in the people and giving them the freedom. It's actually not because the people in these organizations are doing a bad thing. It's just that it's typically only a couple of individuals. Even in multi-billion-dollar organizations, it's normally a very, very small team who are focused on building the metrics and providing the data. So it's actually a lack of investment more than a people wanting to do the wrong thing. They only give what they've got.
I think, though, the lovely idea that's just popped into my head is you're sat there and the business say, well, that's not good enough. CO2 impact can't go up. And you go, well, let's just turn off that finance package and here's an abacus and you can do your financial reporting on that. And here's a slate to report it on and you can send that. Yeah. It's that dark realization that says, we're stuck with this. We need to deal with it in a different way. You can't just say, no, it's got to go down. Well, how is the question?
And that's what's leading to a lot of the game playing that happens, because already we're seeing the narrative happen of organizations saying, yes, but look at how sustainable our applications and services are for our consumer. We're helping our consumer to reduce their emissions by doing this thing. So we are offsetting it by reducing this thing over here. You go, yeah, but you're still doing it gigantically inefficiently over here. You doing that thing over there is
we
not...
don't talk about that.
Yes.
We don't talk about that bit over there. We only talk about the fun bit over there, isn't it?
Yeah, because it feels good over there. They can go, oh yeah, our AI-centric platform has optimized things, and our customers now are doing things 20 times as fast. And blah, blah, yeah, but you've burnt the planet over here to do that, though.
Yeah.
Can you stop, please?
We're not going to get to the bottom of it today, are we? I think the big takeaway for me, though, is to look at this stuff pragmatically and realistically, even if there's bad news attached to the initial kind of pull together of data around that. But Mark, thank you so much for spending some time and giving us your insights right from the coalface of how to deal with this situation. So thanks a lot for that.
Thank you for having me.
And now we end every episode of this podcast by asking our guest what they're excited about doing next. And that could be something in your personal life, like you've got a great restaurant booked at the weekend, or something in your professional world. Mark, what are you excited about doing next?
It's actually in my professional world, and I've got a couple of things I'm doing at the moment, which I'm really excited about because they're monumentally difficult to be trying to achieve. So one of the things that I'm trying to create is a federation across GreenOps that brings together all the abstract parts from across the whole of IT. Because again, it's my point about needing consistency is I'm trying to bring together all these disparate groups that exist everywhere doing great things. So all the foundations you see already who have working groups on sustainability and related things, and we're all struggling with the same thing, which is lack of resource, lack of time, and lack of money. And I'm trying to get a loosely aligned federation to bring the groups together, which is they carry on doing what they're doing, but we're all able to share and access the learnings from other areas.
Very
for
nice.
Example,
how far through are you?
Software, we're about halfway through and getting to the point of actually trying to launch in the next few months. And it's the herding of the cats phase right now.
Right.
So we're trying to get everyone from the phase of, we've said, yes, we're definitely going to do it, to that giant leap of actually wanting to do it. Because there's a lot of kind of politics that goes with this and a lot of accidentally treading on toes. But for me, it's for the greater good. So it's the concept of saying something like, how could we have like one common set of sustainability standards that could be pulled from that would actually be used by data centers, infrastructure, end user devices, cloud, the whole shooting match? And then how do we use that to drive change?
Are you going to try and take on this notion of actually getting to truth, like a baseline of truth rather than vanity?
Yes. Yeah. The idea is being transparent, because the bit that you said that kind of before the end there was about the bad news bit. I think we need to stop thinking about this as being bad news when you're posting bigger numbers. It's not news. It's just a thing.
It's just news.
The consequences of what you're doing. And if you instead of having a bad news and saying, our numbers gone up massively, you went, we're operating at 99.7% carbon efficiency. That is an awesome thing for your business, because you can't make your business more efficient within the boundaries of what you're willing to do. The only alternative option you'd say is the only thing further we could do now is to agree we're going to have less revenue and deliver less services. So it's different thinking. It's shift your thinking and don't think of it as being a bad news thing. Because that's what we post a number, go, that's bad, the number's gone up. It's not. It's just a thing. It's just a number. It's how efficient is it?
So a huge thanks to our guest this week. Mark, thank you so much for being on the show. Thanks also to our sound and editing wizards, Ben and Louis, our unsustainable producer, Marcel, and of course to all of our listeners. We're on LinkedIn and X, Dave Chapman, Rob Kernahan, and Sjoukje Zaal. Feel free to follow or connect with us, and please get in touch if you have any comments or ideas for the show. And of course, if you haven't already done that, rate and subscribe to our podcast. See you in another reality next week.